I've what my writing on screen thing broke somehow. I'll have to fix that after stream. But yeah, I don't know what happened there. That was really weird. That's never happened before, but it's streaming. If everything went technically correct, that would be, unusual. All right. Losing grip on the third realm against naive realism for intuitions. So we're going to talk about like what do you think things are? What are your intuitions about stuff? Here we go. Naive realism in the philosophy of perception is the view that successful perception involves a direct relation between perceiving subjects in the world. So you see some shit, that's because you saw something in the world. There you go. That's the naive realism. I seen some shit. In contrast to intentionalist dogma, the naive realist says that when you see a cat on a mat, it isn't that you have some representational state of a cat on a mat, and that if you're lucky, the state bears a reliable causal connection to some cat on the mat in the external world. Instead, the naive realist says that your perception involves a worldly relation which is partially constituted by the cat and the mat. So if you see a cat in the mat, you see a cat in the mat. You're not seeing a concept of a representation of the cat in the mat that has something that connects to the world. You're just seeing the cat on the mat. A spatiotemporal chunk of the world is presenting itself to you rather than being represented to you, and this presentation gives you direct acquaintance with that chunk of the world. One purported advantage of such a view is that it removes the epistemic veil between perceiving subjects and the world that other theories of perception appear to saddle us with. Yeah, so if you have if you're thinking that when you see the world, you see some sort of put together representation of something that it could be wrong. Sure, but when you see the cat on the mat, you're actually getting it. And the problem with naive realism is, of course, how do you handle illusions? Is this a duck or a rabbit? And so that's the question. For a naive realist, if there's a cat in the mat, but it's not really a cat or it's not really a mat, what do you do? Okay. There is another domain where there is an even more mysterious epistemic veil between subjects and chunks of the world. Knowledge in traditionally a priori domains, such as mathematics, logic, and ethics. It's natural then to ask whether a similar move could be made to remove the veil between intuiting subjects and, for example, mathematical facts. Such a view has been developed and defended in recent years by Elijah Chudnoff and John Bergson. And this is what we were talking about earlier with Arethius. 2 plus 2 is 4. Can you just say that you see in the world 2 plus 2 is 4? Can you? Have you ever seen a 2 plus 2 equaling 4 in the real world? What would it mean to see a plus? What would it mean to see a 2? Not just two things, but a 2. This is the question that they're asking here. 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's in chat now. No, I wrote 2 plus 2 minus 4 equals 4. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now, that is an instance of this, but does that actually show you that 2 plus 2 equals 4, or am I just stating it? So, our aim in this paper is to show that this extension of naive realism to a priori domains won't do the epistemic work it is purported to do. At best, it moves the bump in the epistemic rug. Ooh, I like that expression, bump in the epistemic rug. We will show this by considering a crucial disanalogy between perceptual naive realism and what we call intuitional naive realism. In brief, the disanalogy we point to has to do with veridical hallucinations and illusions. What we were talking about last episode, for anyone that was watching that. While proponents of PNR have a natural story of what distinguishes veridical hallucinations and illusions from successful perception, this story cannot be extended to a priori domains. And if you remember from last Philosophy Roulette, they could say, look, you only get the actual world when everything's working right. It's the good conditions for your visual system to see the world, but of course you can see things that aren't there when things aren't working right, and that's easy for hallucinations. You just say that's one of the times when it's not working right. But the problem with a priori domains, if you are doing it rationally, then you're irrational, but then you can't say you have evidence at that point. But how would you do that? And so we're going to see how they go about this. Our plan for the paper is as follows. In section 1, we sketch out the core features of the view we call INR, focusing especially on Bengtson and Chudnoff since they are the most influential proponents of such a view. In Section 2, we present our objection to INR. We then argue that the solution to the analogous problem for PNR isn't available to INR, nor are alternative paths for solving it. Ultimately, we conclude that even if any of these other paths succeed, INR is not doing any epistemic work. So there is no epistemic reason to favor INR over its intentionalist alternatives. Section 3 concludes. Okay, so I'm going to lose all my viewers. Bengtson's influential paper, Grasping the Third Realm, is a nice discussion not only for its sophisticated defense of what we are calling INR, but also for its work in presenting and clarifying a long-standing problem for the claim that we have knowledge of abstract objects of various sorts: mathematical facts, moral facts, property facts, platonistically construed. As Bengtson says, the deep problem here is in explaining how in the world we could bear some relation to abstract objects that could ground non-accidentally true beliefs about the nature of those entities. So basically, look, in chat right now it says 2 plus 2 is 4. Now, why would you believe chat? Why would anyone believe what I just typed into chat? There is no reason to believe it. But what you need to do here is you have to find some way to, how in the world we could bear some relation to the abstract objects, because 2 plus 2, it says 2 plus 2 equals 4, but this doesn't prove nothing. So what is the relationship we have to 2's, the concept of plus, the concept of equals, and the concept of 4? So how do you have that relation? Okay, and so this is what they say: the non-accidental relation question. What relation does a thinker's mental state, her intuition, bear to an abstract fact that explains how the state can be non-accidentally correct with respect to that fact, hence able to serve as a source of knowledge of it? Yeah, so say you think 2 plus 2 is 4, and that's why chat in this one line where it says it is correct, because they're calling that an intuition. Well, that's a mental state. One place this question comes up is in distinguishing between successful knowledge-enabling states and veridical hallucinations. This arises in both the perceptual and the intuition cases. Bengtson gives an example of the latter kind. Suppose that Ramanujan, a mathematical genius, and I, a mathematical pedestrian, both have the intuition that 1792 is the smallest number expressible as the sum of 2 positive cubes in 2 different ways upon considering the number for the very first time. Ramanujan has this intuition because he is a brilliant mathematician, or I have it because I have a capricious brain lesion. Okay, so the author is saying, look, I am hallucinating this thing. It just happens to be the exact same thought as a mathematical genius, and is correct. We need an account of the relation that holds between Ramanujan and the mathematical fact, but doesn't hold between the mathematical pedestrian and the fact, despite them both coming to believe the truth. Only Ramanujan has the knowledge of the fact, and this is presumably because of some relation between Ramanujan and the fact that grounds the non-accidental truth of his belief. Do we? I'm not sure. Has Ramanujan proved this, or did he just come up with this and he doesn't know if it's true yet? I'm not sure about that, actually. That we need this account actually makes sense. I mean, the fact that he's a mathematical genius and could prove it doesn't mean that it didn't come to Ramanujan in the same way as the brain lesion is acting on the author's brain. For all we know, like, Ramanujan's brain has something very similar to the brain lesion going on, but Ramanujan also has the skill to prove it later. I don't know. As noted above, this question can be asked about concrete objects as well. This isn't a matter of special pleading against the proponent of a priori knowledge, but in the case of concrete objects, the answer is clear enough. There is a causal connection between the thinker's mental states, perceptual experiences, and concrete goings-on in her perceptual environment. This causal link is a paradigmatic instance of a non-accidental relation between perceiver and perceived that can illustrate perception as a source of knowledge. In the case of intuitions, no such causal connection is to be found, so we need something else. Yeah, so they're basically saying if I see something, it's because there is some shit there and it's causing me to see it. So I'm looking at my webcam and the fact that I'm looking at it and that it's causing me to see the webcam. But when it's an intuition, you're not looking at anything. And there's no causal structure there. However, the causal connection story isn't the only story that gets told, even in the perceptual case. According to perceptual naive realism, the relation between perceiver and perceived is not fundamentally one about some chunk of the world causing a certain experience. Instead, perceptual experience is literally constituted by some chunk of the world. The motivations and attraction of this view are outside the scope of this paper, but there are many. Okay, so it's not that you are getting some causal chain, you're just getting the thing itself into the world, but a part of the thing. What is important is that the perceptual naive realism, so it is about some weird, you're getting some part of the thing into your head somehow. Interesting. What is important about PNR, the perceptual naive realism, just as with the classic causal representationalist view of perceptual experience, points to a kind of non-accidental relation between subject and world which can ground knowledge. For it is clear that constitution is a metaphysical determination relation which, in the relevant sense, is non-accidental. So yeah, it's non-accidental that you're seeing something in the world if part of it is in your head, makes it into your head. So they're not using the causal structure here, they're using a different structure. So they're calling it a metaphysical determination relation, but whatever it is, it has gotten into your head somehow, just not through causal structure, but through some sort of weird perceptual ability. If the external physical bottle on the table in front of me is a partial constitute of my experience, there is, in an important sense, no gap between myself and the world to allow accidentality in. So if y'all can see this cup here, that means the cup is now in your head. My cup's in your head. Oh my God. And it isn't that there was a causal structure that like started with my cup that went through like Twitch and came out to you on the other side. It's that this cup is now in your head with this perceptual naive realism. You saw it and that made it into your head. At this point, one may raise the concern that something must be wrong here. After all, while perhaps sometimes my experience of a bottle on the table bears a non-accidental connection to the bottle on the table, at other times I may have a subjectively indistinguishable hallucination. So you could have hallucinated my cup then. The standard response is to appeal to disjunctivism. Disjunctivism is a family of views, and as with the motivations for naive realism, the details here are not of our concern. But the rough idea is that given that perception in the success case is partially constituted by a chunk of the world, hallucinations are experiences of a fundamentally different kind. In short, then, perception essentially does bear a non-accidental constitution to the world that can ground knowledge, even if there may be other subjectively indistinguishable states that do not. Yeah, so if like you're hallucinating this cup, then it's not really here and the cup isn't part of your head because the cup isn't really there. The hallucination is there. It's all digital imagery, just like the Matrix. Yeah, but if it's just digital imagery, then that's just how the world is, and it is just as real. Didn't you hear that part? The Matrix is more real than the real world. Cypher knew what he was talking about. We could talk about the Matrix one day. That would actually not be a bad discussion. At the beginning, in like college, I take it, at least some of you have been to college, but the first week or two of the year, like in my school, they let you like go to classes and, take the class or sit there to see if you want to take the class. And I was in this class and they brought up and this was like not like a low level class, it was at least a medium level class at the time, and they brought up the Matrix and we're talking about stuff, and I like completely disagreed with the professor. I was just like, you know what, screw this, I'm gone. So I never went back. I was like, I don't need this class where I don't even agree with the Matrix with the professor. I still think the guy was wrong. Like what he was saying is a perspective. I think he was just ignoring certain things in the movie. I was like, you're ignoring like what they said. It's like your theory just is not like connecting with the evidence. Anywho, yeah, we can talk about the Matrix one day. It's all just digital. Descartes and Cartesian demons and stuff. Okay. Bengson's insight is to take the PNR story and to extend it to intuitions for a view we called intuitional naive realism. The structure of the view here mirrors the structure of PNR, so doesn't appear to require any claim about a causal connection between intuitions and abstract objects. Instead, in success cases of intuition, abstract objects are partial constituents of the intuition in question. Okay, so just as now that you're seeing the cup part of the cup is in your head. When you have a mathematical intuition that 2 + 2 is 4, you are getting part of the idea of 2 and plus 2 is equal to 4 into your head from wherever it existed. And that place where these things exist is, since Frege, called the third realm. So this is not exactly Platonic heaven, but it's close. Let's walk through an example to see how this is supposed to work from Elijah Shadhoff. At some point in my life, I didn't know that circles are symmetrical about their diameters. I just hadn't thought about it. Now I do know that. This seems to me as certain as anything I believe. What happened? On the face of it, all I did was imagine folding some circles over some of their diameters, whereupon I had an intuition that circles are symmetrical about their diameters, which intuition I took at face value. For Shadhoff, this imagining of an arbitrary circle done properly was enough to make this abstract fact about circles and their diameters part of his intellectual awareness. In other words, the abstract property of circularity and diagonality are partial constituents of the intuition experience in question. Thus, as with the perceptual case, there is a non-accidental connection between the intuition in question and the abstract objects it is about. So far, we have given a gloss on the general view we will object to by way of Bengtson. Shadhoff's view shares all of above with Bengtson, but differs in a few respects. First, it is important for Shadhoff that successful knowledge-grounding intuition has a presentational phenomenology. A presentational phenomenology for Shadhoff is when a particular mental state with P as its constituent is such that it makes it seem to you as if this experience makes you aware of a truth maker for P. Well, that's a mouthful. In a good case, I'll explain in a sec. In a good case, an intuition, in fact, does make you aware of a truth maker for P, but the seems to you here is important. For Shadhoff, presentational phenomenology is not factive. He allows for hallucinations with presentational phenomenology, for example. Okay, so you're like the imagining of the thing is not 100% enough, because you could say you were drunk and thought certain shapes folded in certain ways, but then you realize when you're sober that no, you can fold folding something like down the middle doesn't actually mean it lines up. You could get confused on that, say like on an oblong thing. Second, for Shadhoff, intuitions are constituted out of other mental states, imaginings, and thoughts. This difference between Bengtson and Shadhoff is not itself important for our purposes, but it is related to a third difference that may seem to be. To understand this third difference, let's first look at Shadhoff's canonical statement of his account. Formal naive realism. If S is intuitively aware of an abstract object O by having intuition experience E, then E depends on O, in that, in accordance with the essence of E, O is part of the principle of unity that E's material parts instantiate and thereby determines E's phenomenal character. The key here is that Shadhoff has given us a bit more detail about what it takes for an intuition to involve awareness of and thus partial constitution by an abstract object. Okay, yeah, so let me finish up. Maybe they'll explain. When awareness of an abstract object is present, so you're thinking of something like a circle, for example, the experience is partly determined by the principle of unity of which the abstract object O is a part. So what exactly is a principle of unity? The notion comes from Mark Johnston. A principle of unity, for Johnston, is a feature of the structure of a set of certain parts, such that the structure is necessary for that set to compose the thing that it is. For example, a pile of bicycle parts is not a bicycle, even if all the necessary parts are there. We also need added to this for the parts to be put together in a certain way. So too for Chudnoff, our imaginings and thoughts must be put together in a certain way for them to constitute awareness of an abstract object or proposition. The principle doing this work of putting together is none other than the abstract object or proposition itself. So for Chudnoff, only when the abstract object is playing a determining, partially constituting role as a principle of unity is an intuition going to put us in a position for a priori knowledge. Okay, it is a really big paragraph. It just says, when you think of a circle, you actually have to think of the circle in the right way. You can't be confused about what circles are. You have to get the abstract object, say a circle, in the right way. And then, so it's in accordance with its essence, which that says up here. And then that part of his principle is unity. So it has to get the circle in the right way, and that part that you get in the right way has to be like fundamental to the thing. And that is how you actually get the intuition, the intuition of the circle, by getting the actual important parts into your head, because then you actually have circle stuff in your head. Returning to Bengson's Ramanujan case, we can see how Einar can distinguish between Ramanujan's intuition and the mathematical pedestrian's intuition. Ramanujan's intuition is partially constituted by the mathematical fact he is intuiting, while the pedestrian's intuition is not. It is merely a veridical intellectual hallucination. Yeah, because they're saying when Ramanujan thinks of it, Ramanujan is thinking of the concepts. When the pedestrian person is thinking of it, they're not thinking of the concepts in the right way. They just had the right answer. So in other words, Ramanujan's brain is showing the work. The pedestrian's person is just copying the answer. So it looks as though Einar can provide an answer to the non-accidental relation question in terms of constitution, just as in the case of PNR. Okay. I'm getting there. The disanalogy between intuitions and perceptions. The main problem with Einar as we see it is this. While Einar does provide an answer to the non-accidental relation question, this answer moves the bump in the epistemic rug rather than getting rid of it. I like this, moves the bump in the epistemic rug. It's kicking the can down the road, moving the goalposts, that sort of thing. This is because the solution given by Einar raises another important epistemic question that is not very far off from our original question, and Einar does not have the resources to answer it. Even more severely, Einar enjoys plausibility mainly by appeal to this perceptual counterpart, PNR. However, the same question applied to PNR can be answered, and so the analogy breaks down, leaving Einar unmotivated. To see what closely related question we have in mind, we need to return to the case of mathematical pedestrian discussed above. Just like in the case of perceptual experiences, one can have an intellectual experience that matches the facts, but only accidentally so, and so counts not as a successful intuition, but rather as a veridical intellectual hallucination. Distinguishing between successful intuition and veridical intellectual hallucination, recall, is part of the motivation for positing the answer and answering the non-accidental relation question. Yeah, they're just saying, look, someone just can't get the truth by dumb luck. You have to do it in the right way. Since Einar answers the non-accidental relation question, it also tells us what distinguishes a successful intuition. You have to show the work. What is successful? Intuition, that P, from a veridical intellectual hallucination, that P. Namely, that the former but not the latter is constituted by the fact that P. But what Einar doesn't tell us is what makes it the case that one intellectual experience is constituted by the fact that P and another is not. Call this the non-arbitrary constitution question. Okay, so now we're talking about what makes up the intuition. The non-arbitrary constitution question. What makes it the case that some intellectual experiences are constituted by the facts while others are not? Intellectual experiences are constituted by facts? When was the last time you had an experience that was constituted by facts? That's not the nature of experience. I mean, you can pick facts out of your experience, but experiences are not facts. No one has, goes and experiences, they're not the same thing. You don't break up your experience into facts. No one does that. There are facts that make up your world, but you don't experience the facts. So this is some weird stuff going on right here. This is something very strange happened right there. Now, I don't actually think the authors are incorrect in this move, but this is just a strange phenomenological point. no experience is like, experiences are not broken up by facts. That's just not how experiences are. And if you think experiences do break down to facts, you let me know. But like when you go running, you're experiencing the running, like the outside. But like, are you experiencing the fact that the ground is made of concrete? Or are you experiencing or is the experience that you're, hitting your feet onto the ground? That's what the experience is. Now, like, the concrete is like a fact, but like that's not your experience. It's different things. Okay. Maybe sometimes constitution is a matter of brute fact. It is just the case that the numbers 1, 2, 3 constitute the set of 1, 2, 3, and there's not much more one can ask about this fact. We don't deny that this occurs. However, there are cases in which we can sensibly ask why some constitution occurs. This happens when we distinguish between a successful case where the constituents indeed constitute the relevant entity and an unsuccessful case where these constituents are in some sense present, but they don't thus constitute the relevant entities. Think back to Johnson's case of a bicycle being constituted by its parts. Presumably, there's some story to be told about why the bicycle is constituted by these parts in this case, but wouldn't be if the same parts were scattered around the world rather than located in one place. Yeah, so you have to have the right thought in the right way. The constitution of intuitions falls into the latter category. It seems like there must be some explanation of why the former intuition is constituted by the relevant fact while the latter isn't. To see this, consider the counterpart question applied to the case of perception. To fix ideas, consider an example of a veridical perceptual hallucination taken from Bengtson. A capricious brain lesion might cause you to hallucinate that there's a red apple in front of you when, by sheer accident, a red apple is indeed present. Okay, so y'all are actually hallucinating this cup, even though you're actually seeing it now too. This is not a case of successful perception, even though your experience matches your visual environment, because your experience isn't properly connected to the fact that there's a red apple in front of you in a non-accidental way. This is the perceptual analogy to the mathematical pedestrian case for intuitions above. I agree with this. Actually, the paper that actually just got linked in chat deals with this example. It talks about Wittgenstein. One of the last things he wrote was that if someone's sleeping and they say it's raining out, well, in their dream they're saying it's raining, but that's not connected to the actual rain. But the funny part is, Wittgenstein says even if in the dream the person is hearing the rain. So the question is, and it is properly connected in Wittgenstein's dream. So Wittgenstein actually disagrees with this statement right here. That's just how it is. So this is a very weird thing, and this is why I wrote about it, is because Wittgenstein actually disagrees with this example. And if you guys want to know my views on this, you can go talk about, well, this is about epistemology. It's not about their perception. But like, it's a very unusual take on this stuff, and that's why why I like that paper, because I got to write about something very strange in this area. But yeah, you can see why. What they're saying is still not wrong. Wittgenstein would say they're right, but for the wrong reason. So if like you're hallucinating an apple and you say there's an apple, that there happens to be an apple. Hey, Glutendorf, awesome. Yeah, that, I'll be breaking up the vids probably in the next week or so. You can check the VOD and there'll be a highlight for the previous, that was a fun paper we did. So welcome back. If you have any questions, we're reading something actually on perception now, so less exciting. The other one was a lot more fun, but this is metaphysics of perception. Yay, I like it. So yeah, and if you want to know more about this, let me know. The previous one was audience choice. You can thank Infernal for the last one. This one was my choice just because no one said anything else, so I just grabbed one that is of a reasonable length, because I'm going to get out of here after this. I can't keep talking for more than like 2.5 hours. It gets hard if I go to 3. But yeah, that's why it's roulette. I pick them randomly or they're given to me. I don't know what I'm getting. Yeah, philosophy roulette. Okay, so anyway, if someone is hallucinating something and it actually happens to be there, they're not seeing the thing, and so they're not getting the information in the right way, is what they're saying. So, even if we assume that PNR is correct, and that what distinguishes a successful perception that P from a veridical hallucination that P is that the former but not the latter is constituted by the fact that P, we may still ask, what makes it the case that the former is but the latter isn't constituted by the relevant fact? It seems unacceptable to take this difference to be a brute fact. Could it really be that some veridical perceptual experiences, but not others, just happen to be constituted by the facts? Okay, so what this means is, look, we defined ourselves to saying that the hallucination isn't what the world is, but you can't do that in real life. So how do we know that this perceptual experience, that which ones are veridical and some are truth, have to do with the truth, and some are hallucinations, but we can't know that ahead of time. So why isn't that hallucination connected to the real world? Proponents of PNR have a natural response to this question. The reason why an experience that there's a red apple present caused by a brain lesion isn't constituted by the fact that there's a red apple present, so if a brain lesion makes you think there's an apple, it isn't constituted by the fact in the world, it's constituted by the brain lesion. And so isn't a case of successful perception, is that there is no causal relation of the right sort between the experiencing subject and the fact that there's a red apple present. This may come as a surprise to the reader, as PNR was presented as above as an alternative to a causal theory of perception. However, PNR doesn't need to buy into the whole representationalist theory in order to acknowledge that there are causal constraints on perception, and that those play some important role in explaining the Constitution facts. Yeah, see, again, if you want to do this, you can say, look, there is still causality, it's just not the normal causal chain that we are denying. There might be some other one here. There is no in-principle barrier for PNR to accept both the very plausible claim that there are causal constraints on perception and the claim that perception isn't a matter of representation, but rather a matter of a relation of constitution between the subject's mental state and the relevant perceived fact. Yeah, so you have to actually have part of the apple in your head. Like you have to physically have that image in your head, not the image, the apple, part of that's actually in your head, and that has to be what is doing the perception or working with the perception. So it's not that you have a causal chain, it's actually in your head, but you have to actually still be perceiving that thing and not something else. And that could be causally constrained. You are sort of focusing your attention on is actually the thing in the world and not the hallucination. So you can say attention is causally determined, and that makes some sense. You can be hallucinating, but you can ignore the hallucination and look at the real one. This kind of view is even advocated in the literature. Alex Morgan argues that accepting causal constraints on perception helps solve an acute problem for PNR, what's known as in the perceptual literature as the screening off problem. Getting into this problem and how causal constraints help solve it, according to Moran, is beyond the scope of the paper. What's important for us is that Moran in effect also argues for another thesis, namely that accepting causal constraints on perception is compatible with PNR, as well as with PNR being an alternative to the causal theory of perception. Yeah, so you can have an alternate to the causal theory of perception. You can say, but there are other causal parts. It's just not in the perception. It's in the something else. The thought goes as follows. Proponents of PNR and the causal theory of perception alike have a reason to accept the claim that perceiving is a matter of being in contact with the world in a distinctive way. Anne's here, Rethius was here. Oh, JT Farms is here. Hey, what's up, JT Farms? I didn't see you, JT, earlier. People are getting quiet, but I don't want to call them out. That's not a nice thing to do usually. Let them lurk. So, people want to say hi, say hi. If you don't, it's fine by me. Yeah, I'm a don't call out the lurkers streamer. Some people be like, yo, what's up? Tell me how you doing. It's cool if you just want to listen. So a matter of being in contact with the world in a distinctive way. Now, it isn't causal in this thing, but it's still distinctive, as well as the claim that this contact is causal. Yeah, and so you can do that also. However, they should differ on what kind of role causation plays. When adopting causal constraints on perception, proponents of PNR adopt causal constraints on the type of the mental state being tokened. That is, whether something is of the mental type of perception rather than hallucination would depend on whether the right kind of causal connection is in place. Yeah, I know people like to do stuff while streaming. That's like 95% of my stream content is I'm doing something else. So yeah, so you have to have the right type of perception, non-hallucinatory one. So by contrast, the causal theory of perception takes the mental type involved in perception and hallucination to be the same, and the causal conditions come into the picture in determining whether that mental type has the property of being a perception or a hallucination. So while both theories can and should agree that perception is causal in nature, they should still disagree on whether that constraint is one that helps individuate the relevant mental type or not. That's fine. If this is correct, then PNR can easily solve the perceptual counterpart of the non-arbitrary constitution question. The same isn't true about INR. Excuse me. The domain to which INR applies is one of causally efficacious entities. This is exactly why they are notoriously hard. Let me restate that. I didn't say that right. The domain to which INR applies is one of causally inefficacious entities, because numbers aren't supposed to have causal power. The things you think up, they're not like causally affecting you. This is exactly why they are notoriously hard to square with our demand for non-accidentality to begin with. But that means that the natural answer to the non-arbitrary constitution question in the case of perception isn't available to INR. Because like something in the world can make us think about it by like seeing it. So me going like this makes you look at the cup, you think about the cup. Me pointing to 2 plus 2, like 2 plus 2 equals 4, that only makes you look at that instance of 2 plus 2 equaling 4. It doesn't point you to the mathematical fact. It's only making you look at that instance of it, is what they're saying, and that is different from the mathematical concepts of what 2 and 4 and plus actually are. So, author says, as far as we can tell, no other answer is available either. Bengtson correctly insists that answering the non-accidental relation question cannot be done in epistemic terms. But if we answer the non-arbitrary constitution question in epistemic terms, then appealing to the constitution and answering the non-accidental relation question violates this condition. If we explain constitution by appeal to epistemic features, and we explain non-accidentality by appeal to constitution, then we explain non-accidentality by appeal to epistemic features due to the transitivity of explanation. And no other relevant non-epistemic connection seems forthcoming. This is exactly why we turn to constitution to begin with. Okay, so I guess they'll explain. We're almost done, so let's get through this. If you have questions, I'll answer them, because I think I know what's going on here. Basically, it's saying, look, we don't know what's going on in Ramanujan's brain when a mathematical genius thinks of the math. And so the idea that you can be like, well, it's got some sort of certain kind of constitution, well, that's just hooey. We don't know what is going on in Ramanujan's brain, and so you can't guarantee that like you're talking about anything other than just some sort of weird state in Ramanujan's brain, but that's just some epistemics. That's just what Ramanujan thinks. Okay, even if the proponent of INR could point to some other metaphysical relation that could answer the non-arbitrary constitution question, this wouldn't be of much help. For suppose she does. Let's call this relation R. If we could find some relation R that could distinguish between successful and hallucinatory intellectual experiences, why not just point to that to answer the non-arbitrary constitution question and the non-accidental relation question? In such a case, the appeal to constitution in the account has become an explanatory idle wheel. Either the appeal to constitution fails, or it is an unnecessary epicycle on a successful answer to the non-accidental relation question. Either way, it makes no theoretical progress, and we are back to square one. Yeah, so if you try to say, well, the ideas going through Ramanujan's head are what are making the thoughts true, but it's like, no, the thoughts being true has to still relate to the truth in the world. It's not that Ramanujan, as a mathematical genius, has the right thoughts. The right thoughts are only the right ones because they talk about the world in the right way. And so you still need a relation to the world. Finally, one may wonder whether an appeal to Chudnov's principle of unity may help here. As stated in Section 1, Chudnov imposes an additional constraint on veridical intuitions. For our intuitions to be veridical, they must be put together out of their parts such that the unity of their phenomenal character will be partly determined by the relevant abstract objects or proposition. However, important as this constraint might be for other purposes, it seems idle when considered in our present context. As Chudnov himself agrees, presentational phenomenology, the phenomenology involved in intuitions, is not factive. Yeah, so you may think something's the case, but the way it looks to you does not actually mean how it is in the world. That's what presentational phenomenology means. Like, you might think, oh wow, that just proves that a circle is round, but you might be hallucinating. And so we can grant Chudnov's constraint on successful intuitions and restate the non-arbitrary constitution question in the following way. And so this is the non-arbitrary constitution question, star. What makes it the case that the phenomenal character of some intellectual experiences is partly determined by the essence of facts? What makes it the case that the phenomenal character of some intellectual experiences is partly determined by the essence of the facts, while that others is not? Since intuition is modeled over perception, Chudnov is committed to saying that also in the case of perception, the phenomenal character of successful cases is partly determined by the essence of the fact, while that of veridical hallucinations isn't. And yet again, we can start explaining why this is the case when it comes to perception by appealing to causation, and we have nowhere to start when it comes to intuition, so we are back at square one. Glutendorf asks, have you ever encountered a person who strongly believes that it's important to determine their own reality by trying to believe that it is the way they want it to be? No, I've not. I don't think anyone's ever claimed that. Like, they're trying to force their world by strongly believing it in certain ways. You know, I've met kind of delusional people, but I don't know that they... You know, what's it called? Like, I think there's like positive psychology people that they think that they're going to shape their world by acting in a certain way or believing in a certain way. I don't think I've ever actually I've run into someone that like really, really, really believes it. But of course there's something to, like, you change yourself. You will change your world eventually by acting in a different way about it. Like, if you pray every day, like, that will, build up over time. It's an Aristotelian point where, like, if you change your habits, and the habits might affect your beliefs, that your world will change eventually. Now, you can't really will the world into being the way you want it. Like I can believe very hard that I have millions of dollars in my bank account, and that's not gonna ever make millions of dollars go into my banking account. But there is something to, like, if you can change your beliefs, you will change your world. But I don't know of anyone who actually... I mean, there's people that, like, you can change your outlook on things, and that will change you. But I don't know, and you're part of the world. But, there's limits to that. So it's like, if you go, go find a monk. I bet, like a religious person, I bet, like, they have strong enough beliefs that they have changed that has made them see the world in a different way. Now, has it changed their world? I mean, how much of that? Like, what do you mean by determining their own reality at that point? Yeah, I mean, so there's limits to these things. You can change something about how you see the world, but yeah, I don't know how much that will actually change your world. Okay, finishing this up. This objection, if correct, undermines the motivation for INR in two ways. First, it shows that the answer given to the non-accidental relation question is unsatisfactory, and so the reason we had to accept INR, that it alone can answer this long-standing question, is undermined. Second, INR gains a lot of its plausibility from its analogy to PNR, but INR's failure to answer the non-arbitrary constitution question shows that this analogy is very limited, and so it's not at all clear how accepting PNR should affect what we think of as INR. Think of INR. Yeah. Again, it's still, if you're gonna just be able to think of something, you don't get out into the world. You can't get the truth automatically. That's too easy. All right, last two paragraphs. 3, taking stock. Perceptual naive realism has the potential to remove the epistemic veil between subject and the world. It also provides something of an alternative to traditional causal theories of perception. Because of these two features, it is sensible to see whether a version of naive realism could do epistemic work as part of a theory of successful intuition experiences. This results in a view we call intuitional naive realism, INR, defended by John Bengtson and Elijah Chudnoff. In this paper, we haven't argued that INR is false. However, we have argued that it cannot do the relevant epistemic work that Bengtson and Chudnoff have put it to, and cannot explain the difference between successful intuitions and veridical hallucinatory intuitions, and thus cannot adequately answer the non-accidental relation question. Whatever other advantages INR may have, it does not provide any assistance in grounding a complete epistemological theory of the traditionally a priori domains: math, logic, morality. Okay, so I like that paper. I think this is a well-argued paper. I don't really, I got to talk about, perceptual phenomenology, got to talk about a little bit of this vision stuff. I like this paper better than the last paper I read on this topic. So I think this is actually a pretty good paper. I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say about it, because basically it says, look, if you think an intuition is veridical, like you get intuitions about like mathematical things that are true, like 2 + 2 = 4. Now, in some sense, what they're doing is they're building a proof into the person's head. And they're saying, well, you have the right concepts in the right way, and therefore 2 + 2 does equal 4. But what they're saying is that still doesn't get you the proof. The proof is something about how the concepts are structured. And if you were just granting that, like, the mathematician has the proof in their head, that's ad hoc, basically. Glutendorf says, I agree with your stance on it. There is certainly a good use for the ability, but there are some limits. I met someone who does that and is extremely judgmental to the point of hate and does not allow themselves to communicate, to understand others. It's kind of alarming. Yes. This is why propaganda works. It just is. Like, you can get people to believe things by shaping their world, and they're just doing it to themselves. And yeah, it is very alarming. And like I said, I mean, I've met people who have like crazy ideas, but like they do it to themselves. I've never met anyone who like damaged themselves that bad. I mean, I expect it's from some other reason too, but yeah, like I'd have to ask such a person, why would they do that to themselves? Like, just maybe out of morbid curiosity. But yeah. Okay, so here's the thing about this. If you're going to intuit mathematical things, what they really want, you really need, is the proof, and then you have something external in the world that shows why the mathematical thing is true. But that's different from just the intuition of like why things are the way they are, and so that's more work. And so you can't just intuit the truth in like a mathematical genius's head, because a mathematical genius, who knows what's in their concepts, but it may not be the proof. And even if it was the proof, like, that's a different thing than just having them come up with an arbitrary answer that happens to be true. That isn't a hallucination. So you need the next step, and the perceptual answer to this, saying, well, you're getting something from the world, is not the proof, it's something else. And then you would still say, well, what they got from the world would be an equivalent to a proof, but that's not doing it. What Rethius was talking about earlier in a way? Oh, yeah. Sure. So, yeah, Rethius was talking about, like, what was Rethius talking about? Rethius was bringing up, Ludendorff says, and I'm seeing a general trend, at least in the USA, of people similarly sloughing off all accountability to the objective, or at least subjective, and see rationalist exchanges of reason as some kind of devilishness. Yeah, this is what Rethius was getting into also. Yeah, they're trying to say, like, this is what objectivity is. And they have a very narrow definition of, like, what they think objectivity is. So, yeah, that's right. They're trying to, they think that they have a privileged view on objectivity. How we established was true. That's right, Infernal. They think they have a privileged view, and that's basically what I was calling propaganda. So, this is why I have a problem with objectivity. this is why I don't think I expressed it very well earlier, but I don't think there is it's very easy to have a good view of what is objective and what isn't, except in extremely simple cases. So that's right. Yeah, oh God. I think everyone with half a brain is starting to realize that the neoliberal economists need to just die off. Like, go, just go away off to a pasture and have fun with yourselves. But it's like it's not been good for anybody, except for neoliberal economists and baby boomers who got in before things broke. Okay. I don't know if I don't have a whole lot more to say. It's just like, basically, I think this article's right. I liked it. I thought it talked about some interesting issues in a reasonably accessible way, at least for me. So this is one of my better papers as far as I'm concerned that I've just randomly come across. This will be getting a recommendation if I can recommend on my Philosophy Roulette account. You know what? I'm going to go do that. I'm going to put a recommendation on this. Boom. Recommended. So that's one of the fun things here is that in this full paper site, it has social media features. And so other people this recommended will now get a +3 on this. So I get a like and a recommend. Oh, I can't do both. Well, this is the thing, Ann. What I'm doing on my stream now is kind of doing a meta journal of philosophy. I'm rereading published papers and highlighting the ones I think are good, like a second round of review by my recommendeds on Phil Papers. So this is a slightly new twist on what I'm doing on stream now. Is are you going to get a recommended from a Phil Papers recommended? You want to read this? Read this sounds like good people to me. So I'm with you on that, Glutendorf. A lot of people online I'd love to, on Twitch, I'd love to grab a beer with one day or whatever their favorite drink is. So. Okay, but I am now at 2 hours and almost 40 minutes. I think that's about it.